Now, I don't want to romanticize our fallibility and our making mistakes, because they can hurt others and they can hurt ourselves. But what is the human factor is that we actually take responsibility.
To this live discussion of the Boyle Lectures for 2025. My name is Niels Henrik Gregersen, and I am the president of International Society of Science and Religion, ISSR, and it is my pleasure to moderate the discussion that we are going to have here. My first thank is, of course, to this year's speaker, the Most Reverend Archbishop Emerita of Sweden, Dr. Antje Jackelén, and we have already heard you, and this was wonderful. And also to the respondent of this year, Professor Arthur Petersen from the University College London, Professor of Science and Technology and Politics. And I am soon going to give the word over to the respondents for today. But before I do so, I also wish to thank Dr. Fraser Watts for being a co-organizer on behalf of ISSR of the Boyle Lectures also this year, and no less to Anthony Nance for making our YouTube channels possible at all. It is now my pleasure to introduce the two respondents for today. Afterwards, we will have a response back from Antje Jackelén, who might also respond to Arthur Petersen's lecture also. The first speaker will be Professor of Nanomaterials at Oxford University, Andrew Briggs. And the second speaker will be Noreen Herzfeld, Reuter Professor of Science and Religion at the St. John's University in Minnesota. It's a pleasure to have two such esteemed speakers and respondents here, coming from the sciences and coming from the world of religion and theology. And without further ado, I wish to give the first word to you, Andrew Briggs, please.
Well, thank you, Niels Henrik, and thank you, Archbishop Antje, for giving us such a feast in your lecture. You summarized your message visually in the shape of a triangle. You called it a dynamic love triangle between faith in knowledge, in other words, science, and knowledge of faith, in other words, theology and spiritual wisdom, and their common responsibility for the world. I'm a scientist. I'm the inaugural holder of the statutory professorship at the University of Oxford in nanomaterials, which is just a hybrid Greek-Latin word for small stuff. And the stuff we research into is so small that we can control and characterize individual quantum states, which allows us to pursue fundamental curiosity and also to provide underpinning science for the emerging quantum technologies, which, according to McKinsey, within the next 10 years are set to contribute up to $2 trillion annually. Now, Archbishop Antje, you likened the relationship between theology and the natural sciences in the Western world to the dynamics of a growing family. I spent 16 years with the artist Roger Wagner, writing a book which Oxford University Press published as The Penultimate Curiosity, in which we describe how through history, going back before writing was invented, science has swum in the slipstream of ultimate questions, with only the occasional mishap, actually. But you then teasingly drew a parallel with how children struggle their way through adolescence. Our neighbours in Oxford had for a time in their hallway a placard which read, "Children, tired of being harassed by your stupid parents? Act now. Move out, get a job, pay your own bills, quick, while you still know everything." And it's rather like the legendary saying attributed to Mark Twain that when he was 14, his father was so ignorant that he could scarcely tolerate his company. But when he got to be 21, he was astonished how much his dad had learnt in the meantime. Now, we can visualize a more mature relationship through Archbishop Antje's triangle. Let's put problems of regional and global importance at the top vertex of the triangle. And then at the bottom left, let's put science. A growing concern amongst scientists is the loss of trust in science. Just this morning, the opening sentence of a newsletter that arrived in my mailbox from the head of the Mathematical, Physical and Life Sciences Division at the University of Oxford, he opens it saying this: "For the first time in my life, increasing numbers of our fellow citizens have come to entirely distrust science and engineering." And then at the bottom right, let's put theology. And among church leaders, it's all too easy to focus on people, as though science was not relevant to human flourishing. But this triangle needs both feet if it's to support the weight of solutions to the problems at the top of the triangle. What are sometimes called wicked problems may appear insoluble because of incomplete, contradictory and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. The term wicked here denotes resistance to resolution rather than moral evil. The question may be ill-posed, the data inadequate, the values disputed, and the endpoint unclear, but nevertheless, a decision is urgent. And it's increasingly recognized, not least by august bodies like the International Science Council, that such problems require a transdisciplinary approach that values and respects different systems of knowledge, including scientific systems of knowledge and religious systems of knowledge. In other words, Archbishop Antje's dynamic love triangle. Archbishop Antje and I are commissioners of the Anglican Communion Science Commission. Of the 42 provinces of the Anglican Communion, 28 now have a lead science bishop to champion engagement with science in their province. And over 2/3 of them participated in the first global conference, which we held in Virginia last October. On the second afternoon, we visited the National Institutes of Health, where we were welcomed by the director, Monica Bertagnoli, who at the time was managing an annual budget of $48 billion. She gave us nearly an hour of her time, and she told us why. About 20% of her budget is spent on internal research programs and about 80% on external research. But there's a third pillar, which is community engagement, without which the underpinning research is not effective. And this visit was an occasion of huge mutual respect. She was amazed that senior church leaders from around the world had taken the time and trouble to come and visit the National Institutes of Health. And the bishops were amazed that the director of such a vast scientific endeavor should give them such a welcome and give so much of her time. And for many of the bishops, the visit to NIH helped to take away the strangeness and perhaps for some even the fear of engaging with science. Here in Oxford, at the Ian Ramsay Centre for Science and Religion, we're starting to develop a research program of theology as underpinning scholarship for science and religion. My own subject of materials is a fundamental science, embracing such basic questions as how do metals deform physically, and also providing enabling science for manufacturing industry, how to make superalloys for gas turbine engines and nanomaterials for future quantum computers. And in a similar way, I think that theology, which rightly studies fundamental questions about the nature of God and how God can be known, can also, without any loss of dignity, provide underpinning scholarship for church members and others who seek to engage with science in pursuit of their responsibility for the world and its inhabitants. So thank you, Archbishop Antje, for your inspirational image of a dynamic love triangle.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for this response and for fleshing out this dynamic love triangle. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, generally speaking, I really feel encouraged also in developing this even more, this partnership with theology and spirituality. What you report from this visit is actually, it is about theology, but it's also about spirituality, because when this head of the NIH says, well, internal research and external research is fair enough, but it won't fill its purpose unless we have the community engagement. And we know that 80+% of the world population have some kind of religious affiliation. And we also know that religious leaders often have access to the grassroots, where government structures and authority structures may be weak and have a whole different opportunity to really reach out with what needs to be done. So this encouraged me to think, also in response to what Professor Petersen was saying in his response to the lecture, that yes, philosophy is good and goes a long way, but it can never replace theology and spirituality. It's not enough. So that would be my take on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Antje. And I think I will give also later on a word to Arthur in order to have a communication between you and Antje, Arthur and Antje on the lectures. But I think it is best that we go now hear you, Noreen. Thank you so much for being here. You have done a lot of research on artificial intelligence and religion. So we look forward to hear what you are going to say. Please.
Thank you, Niels. And thank you, Antje, for an excellent talk. You sketched a history of growing division between science and the humanities. And so the first question that came into my mind was, will AI help close that division, or will it exacerbate it? I see a potential for both of those. And I can certainly see that right now, numerous ethical questions are raised regarding the use of AI. And in this sense, we could see the science behind it being brought together with questions of justice and values, as well as larger questions of what it means to be human, of what is the truth and what is the truth's role in our society. And what can pure ratio not do? But I also see in AI the potential to further the Enlightenment split, particularly when you think about the positions taken by transhumanists and posthumanists, who seem to almost take a quasi-Gnostic position that mind is good and what we really are, and that it must somehow escape matter. And so I wondered, do you see one of these prevailing over the other? Then I ask, is there a counter, particularly to the latter, to the push to separate mind from matter? And I think Christianity needs to recapture a deep embodiment. I think this is something unique that Christianity brings to the table of world religions. The idea that God took on our human embodiment in order to have that kind of close relationship that you mentioned as the fundamental part of the Imago Dei in us. And if you look at Jesus' ministry, boy, what I see is embodiment. He heals people, he feeds people. It's all about people's bodies, not just their minds. And then that brings me, of course, to sustainability, as it brought you, because our bodies won't live in an atmosphere that is not sustainable. One of the things I think we tend to forget is that AI is embodied too. We think it all happens up in the cloud, but there's no such thing as a cloud. It's huge data centers that right now are sucking all the energy that we can possibly give to them. And in many ways, I see the move, particularly in my own country, the United States, toward elevating AI and elevating cryptocurrency, both of these being terrible energy draining things, as some of the biggest threats to sustainability. So that brings me to your final call for hope. A hope that, as you said, leads us to act even in the face of anger, grief, and frustration. And I find myself thinking maybe it's precisely in hope that we bring together spirituality and science, because hope envisions a future and then takes steps towards it. Where do we get that vision? I think the only place we can get it is from spirituality and from the exercise of our intellectus. But then science and ratio provide the means to take the steps towards that vision. But I would just love to hear your thoughts on any of those 3 points. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Noreen. And the word is yours, Antje, please.
Thank you very much, Noreen, and lovely to see you again, even if it's just on the screen. I do think that the jury is out there whether AI will sort of worsen it or close the gap more. I mean, there is a lot of potential, and a lot, I think, depends on what you were pointing to when you talked about the significance of embodiment when it comes to us as humans, and incarnation when it comes to one of the central traits of Christianity. And here exactly the example of transhumanism is quite quite clear. I mean, the goal of transhumanism is sort of optimization, maximalization, and it's not about embodiment, right? Not the way we usually think of embodiment. It wants the perfect, whereas what is so important for what we even call the human factor is actually that we are fallible as humans. Now, I don't want to romanticize our fallibility and our making mistakes, because they can hurt others and they can hurt ourselves. But what is the human factor is that we actually take responsibility for our fallibility, that we seek forgiveness, give forgiveness, reconciliation, and all of that. Where transhumanism talks about optimization, spirituality and theology to talk about like reconciliation or sanctification or whatever, but it's still something different. And the crucial thing, I think, in being the Imago Dei is relationality. And relationality, relations to, well, to God, or the ground of being, whatever you want to call it, to creation as a whole, to fellow human beings, and to self as well. And I think that can't be underlined enough in our days, that relationality is so crucial, because that is a good counterpart to these other tendencies we are seeing. And then I'm very grateful to you for bringing up this connecting sustainability to AI, because to my knowledge, it is rarely spoken about that AI is such an enormous consumer of energy, and thus counteracting sustainability. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much for your responses and replies. There was a very, I think, Arthur Petersen, that you gave a very strong challenge also to Antje Jackelén, and I just would like, when I have heard the lecture and the response, I really wanted also to hear the response from Antje, but I may want to call upon you, Arthur, first. Would you try to say what is your worry about saying that theology and spirituality and perhaps even religion actually means more to us who are into the religious traditions than in the real world? This is how I heard one of your challenges. Please, Arthur.
Yeah, just very briefly. Thank you, Niels. So what Antje Jackelén just said in answering to my response, she said that philosophy is not the same as theology and spirituality, and I agree. However, my point was that theology does not have a monopoly of access to spirituality. And it may not even be the most impactful way in all societies, especially in the West. So my hunch is that philosophy may, without using too much metaphysics, in a very useful way, point out the importance of the experience of spirituality. And then I think Antje and I may find each other in the importance of spirituality in promoting then science and engineering for social change, to deal with the wicked problems such as AI or sustainability. I think we don't really disagree that much. We emphasize different sides of the same coin, and it really depends on the specific culture you're talking about, how much you can play the religion card, and how much you should find another way to connect with spirituality. So that was kind of the thrust of my response.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree that we are not too far apart from each other, but for the sake of like some dynamics, I would say, yes, you're right. I agree. Theology has no monopoly on spirituality, clearly. But I would question that you say that it is not impactful in Western societies. I think that is still very much wedded to this narrative of modernity, just moving all the way towards secularity and secularism. But I think we are sort of past that point. And again, some examples, as I already said, I mean, 80+% of the world population have religious affiliation. It may even be the case that atheism as such is declining in a longer perspective. Another reason is we have so much bad or even mad religion around us, which really requires sound theology and sound spirituality. We are also, at least in Sweden now, we are witnessing that young people are turning increasingly towards the church. We don't quite know for what reasons, but it is easy to guess that there is a quest, a longing, a something. You also said that theology might not have the impact. Well, let's just look back at that famous sermon that Bishop Buddy delivered the day after the installation of Donald Trump. It went absolutely viral. And I don't know how many newspaper articles around the world and how many clips have been watched by that. And I mean, it was, in a sense, it was very ordinary theology and went viral. We can discuss a lot about that, but I would question that philosophy is the stronger of the two. And also, what philosophy? I mean, we are past the point where we can say, oh, philosophy is sort of the meta level in the dialogue between religion and science. It is a sort of a neutral place, and it decides the rules for the dialogues. And we need to ask what kind of philosophy is it? So my question would be, we need both, yes, but it's not a given who is more impactful in what contexts. As you also said, I think in your response, we totally agree that you have to be contextual in these things.
Can I just bring in another issue, because there's been two different fields that have been addressed by Antje in her Boyle lecture, and one is about ecology and the relationship to biology, and the other one has been artificial intelligence that we have addressed more centrally here. But I think there are very curious marriages taking place in the field of ecology. I think of E.O. Wilson, who is probably one of the most reductionistic biologists in his book on sociobiology, saying that we only have a very brief leash from culture to the genes. So the genes are actually determining everything, but still so. In his book, The Creation from 2006, he actually offers a hand of partnership, I think he says, or friendship to religious leaders, because he believes that science and religion are, and now I actually quote him, are two of the most potent forces on earth, and they should work together to save the creation. That's an end quote. That's a very strong view. That is, you can have very reductionistic forms of biological research programs, and you can couple that with the other aspect of the triangle, that is the higher good. And I just want to mention that as an interesting example. And the question then from me is back to Andrew, Noreen, Arthur, and Antje, of course. Do we have a similar movement within the realm of artificial intelligence, or that can be compared to the way in which science and religion are enmeshed in practical life in the world of ecology, or at least to some extent? Or is that more a dualism between ratio and intellectus?
I have an AI company which actually licenses AI very specifically for quantum technologies. So I've thought a great deal about this. And I think the more urgent question with the AI, the one that's with us now, is the question of the AI ethics and what are the ethical drivers for AI. And within the AI world, there's a strong temptation to a sort of consequentialist kind of ethics, which rather quickly translates into utilitarianism. And that is attractive to AI programmers because you can give it a simple mathematical form. You're just trying to sum the total utility that is generated. And of course, for the big AI companies, the total utility means the profit for the company and the increase in value for the shareholders. And I mean, here's where both the theology and the philosophy have a great deal to contribute. If you think in Oxford, the AI Ethics Institute falls within the faculty of philosophy, as it happens at Oxford. And I think most philosophers, most economists, and I hope most theologians would say utilitarianism just doesn't work, and there's empirical evidence as to why it's wrong, quite apart from the moral evidence. So I think what we've got here is a very specific instance of how the science and the theology, the spirituality, can contribute to each other. So the science has a great deal to offer to spirituality and to theology. There's all sorts of illumination, if it, you know, starting with the inspiration to awe and wonder. But then in the other direction, the theology, the religious commitment, the spirituality can offer the wisdom of faith, and I would say specifically the voice of the church to these issues here, where I think there's going to be an increasing appetite on the part of AI workers and inventors and innovators to recognize that they do need some more substantial ethical input than this rather naive and simplistic consequentialism.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We still have, maybe we can round up here. There might also be some of you who actually want to pose a question to Antje or to Arthur. Then there is a possibility for this now. John Peacock, you have raised your hand.
Thank you. Professor Petersen, could you help me understand if I correctly heard you say we can't go back to indigenous spirituality, but later I thought I heard you say that indigenous knowledge, including spirituality, is a major resource for sustainable ecology, and it's intermeshed with modernity.
Yeah, what I problematized was that it was easy to go back, and that we cannot fully go back. And also I criticized the kind of modern use of indigenous spirituality as a resource. There was a critical quote of scientists who think that they can just instrumentally use indigenous knowledge to solve climate adaptation problems. I made claims of fundamental incommensurability, but there is also, it's not completely other, there's also this enmeshment with our modern world. And I think this is a large question, and also an interesting and fruitful question to see what ways are there for diplomacy and ways forward. But that was largely problematizing the use of spirituality as a resource.
Yeah, if I may, I find this also very interesting, the relationship between indigenous knowledge and modernity, and then this term you introduce of the meta-modernity, whether that might offer a third avenue, so to speak. And also connecting that to this example I used in my lecture from the work of Camelo Santos Rolon on the using the dialogue between neuroscience and theology for the sake of decolonization, because that has also bearing on indigenous knowledge, I would say.
I agree with you that theology is important and essential and should play a role in coming dialogues between science, religion, technology, and so forth. I think there's a similar challenge in defining what exactly theology is that we find in the challenge of defining science and defining religion, especially if we take a big historical vantage point, and especially if we take vantage point of other religious traditions outside of Christianity. So, and this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And what exactly is theology when we encounter Indian thought in particular? That's been my focus. I'm wondering if you have any insights or suggestions about this issue.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as I also said in my lecture, I usually use as a working definition, theology is the critical and self-critical reflection on the content and the effects of a religious tradition. Now, this can sound like rationally biased, so to speak, as if it is sort of only a reflection about the dogmatic content. But I think it is a definition that could be widened and also contextualized, for instance, to fit religious traditions that are not encoded in dogma, or that have their their main part just in, not just, that has main part in spiritual or religious practice. I think it's a useful starting point to say, well, this is a critical and self-critical reflection on the content and the effects of a religious tradition. I don't know whether you find that helpful.
I do. Thank you very much. I think that you've provided a definition that can then be used to evaluate texts and traditions, broadly speaking.
Timothy Manes, you have raised your hand as well, please.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all concerned, everyone who's spoken here, for a marvelous experience. So at least in the United States, where I live, the privatization, in Professor Petersen's words, of religion and spirituality, I think has begun to apply to intellectus generally, and partially as a response to the problem of polarization that Archbishop Jackelén refers to. People rely heavily on this false dichotomy between objectivity and subjectivity, so that the products of ratio, particularly what we refer to in the States as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, get treated as the only objective fact. And on the other hand, anything that intellectus can tell us, whether in terms of religion, philosophy, or politics, is just opinion, in which any opinion is sort of by definition no better or worse than any other. And the result of that is that any politically controversial public question becomes basically a matter of private belief. So you can see how this would contribute to a public sense of science as the only source of truth, and at the same time to a degeneration of democracy and an elevation of technocrats and increasingly tech billionaires as the sources of wisdom and power. So is there anything we can do as scholars of the humanities, as theologians in particular, to try and push back against this, to reestablish intellectus as a source not just of commentary that can be taken or left, but as truth?
This is not an easy question. You must have had good teachers who have taught you to ask these questions.
I had wonderful teachers.
I'm glad to hear that. But I think it is indeed a challenge when STEM is upheld as the one objective branch of being human, and the other branch is just labeled private. And I think we have to resist this. I mean, I'm used to this from Sweden as well, where faith has been labeled private and only private. And I have tried to argue it with the Convention of the Right of the Child, that says a child has the right to the standard of living that it needs for the physical, psychological, spiritual, moral, and social development. And for everything except the spiritual, the state, the society takes responsibility, but the spiritual is labeled private. And I think we have to resist this. And maybe when AI forces us to ask new questions about what is it to be human, there also is a chance of bringing these questions to the floor. I was just yesterday in a conversation at one of the universities in this country, and it was a transdisciplinary conversation on AI and human existence. And it A, attracted a lot of people, and B, I often realize that those who work with on the technical side of it, they are so impressed with scholars from the humanities and theology who raise questions that are very simple for us in a way, but they say, wow, we've never thought about that. So I think what I'm trying to say is the courage to ask these questions and bring them to audiences that want to hear them, or they realize that when they hear them, that they wanted to hear them, but they were not aware of that. So I guess we have a mission that is well needed. Don't know whether it was a response, but it was an attempt at least.
And I mean, if I can just add, you know, we're not doing this alone. So as I've already mentioned, the Oxford AI Ethics Institute is cited in the Faculty of Philosophy, and it richly engages joint appointments in the university. There are about 8 joint appointments which span the humanities and computer science and related disciplines. So there are serious people seriously tackling these questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much, Antje, Arthur, Noreen, and thank you all of you for being here and also for writing on the chat. Thanks to Peter Hess too. And I just want to wish you a good evening as it is here in Europe, or a good afternoon as it is in the US, and maybe a night if you come from the Eastern time zones. Thank you very much for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.